everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Vlad and I, it's Wednesday. Vlad and I are back. I feel like we missed a bunch of Wednesdays in a row. We did some Mondays, we had some other days of the week, Vlad. So it feels good to get back in the normal routine of being here Wednesday at about 4 o'clock East Coast time. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, just about every month we go and pick a theme and have conversations surrounding that theme. This, like the last episode, is a bit out of theme, but I'm super excited to go ahead and welcome James on in just a moment. I will say all of June long, we're talking about IIoT. Vlad and I will probably have a series of debates as to what IIoT is or is not. You probably, in fact, could not get us to agree just baseline what IIoT is. And in fact, I'd ask the question of, is IIoT still relevant in 2024? So you guys join next week and all of June long, where I may actually go ask guests that question and they may or may not go ahead and answer. But without further ado, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Officially, this is episode 165, and we'd like to introduce our guest, James Joy. James, welcome to the show.
Hi. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yep. Thank you for joining us today, James. I think it's going to be a very interesting IT/OT conversation. But before we begin and dive into maybe some of the technical or architectural, let's call it, topics, let me ask you a little bit about your background. How did you get started in manufacturing? How did you ultimately navigate the software landscape? And ultimately, what are you doing today?
Yeah, great. I started out of school as an electrical field engineer. And then transitioned into electrical design for a different company. The first company I worked for, I was working in Iceland on the aluminum smelter in Iceland. So that was a fun adventure. And then while I was doing design engineering, people that I worked with thought I might enjoy doing control systems and programming control systems. So I transitioned from doing electrical design over to control systems, mostly doing like Allen Bradley and other PLC platforms and HMI platforms. And then I worked doing that for a while on the design side, and then I transitioned to a construction company, they started a little like systems integrator inside a construction company, and I was running that, and I had a team of about 8 engineers, and we worked in water, wastewater, environmental consulting, and then some manufacturing, and since then I started my own business after kind of asking clients around whether they would be interested in just working with me directly, and turned out most of them were. So I started Joy Automation then, and have been working for several clients ever since. And while I've been in with Joy Automation, I kind of taught myself software development, doing Python, JavaScript, and a few other languages, mostly surrounding I was having some issues with current solutions, and I wanted to be able to develop my own products. And that has kind of expanded into, I have a nice tech stack that I can use for doing a lot of the things that you would do for SCADA. And that kind of leads us to today. So,
and James, I guess just to expand a little bit, because I think I've mentioned this to you, off stream, I've learned about some of the libraries you had built and shared for, SCADA and data ingestion solutions. So I guess, could you provide us a bit of an overview, what kind of libraries you have available and have built, but also, on your business side, so you provide obviously consulting services, implementation services, and these modules, and or, are the modules, let's say, free to use by anyone? Like, what's the structure there?
Yeah, so I provide the project's called Project Kraken. It's a open source, free. The GitHub repo's open. And then I also have kind of a software as a service. I only have a couple clients on it right now, but that utilizes that stack. But the portions of the stack that are open source are I have a PLC platform, a soft PLC that I call Tentacle. That's kind of your alternative to a traditional PLC. And the differences with it are that it runs on general purpose hardware. You don't have to buy into any proprietary ecosystem. You can just run it on any general purpose Linux computer, and it has publish by default to MQTT Sparkplug B. So as you add variables to it, it automatically publishes to the MQTT broker, whether it be local or in the cloud. And it also is programmed using JavaScript at the moment, so modern programming languages, as opposed to the IEC 161131-3 languages. And then on the other side, I needed something to ingest the data and historize it, so I built a product called Mantle, kind of have a octopus Kraken theme going. I got Tentacle and Mantle. Mantle listens on Sparkplug B, and anything that comes in, it historizes to a time series database. I use PostgreSQL with Timescale DB. And it has a GraphQL API so that you can extract the data in any way you want, whether it be through a REST client or using a traditional web framework. So that those are the portions. And so we're buying into a lot of different different technologies using existing technologies from mainstream tech in SCADA. And so in the background, between all of those things, I use a lot of open source projects that are kind of very well utilized in the industry, like Kubernetes, Docker. I wanted to be able to program my PLC using whatever IDE I wanted. So I use VS Code, and so it also utilizes VS Code. So replacing some of the traditional SCADA IDEs that are made by proprietary vendors with open source solutions, and then kind of sprinkling my own code in there where we had holes. That's the kind of the idea.
Let me, I guess, first of all, say that is extremely impressive, because I guess I understand what that takes in a general sense. But let me also, maybe take a step back and say that I think that many engineers on the OT side don't necessarily possess a lot of those skills. And maybe what would be your advice? I certainly, get this question a lot. If someone's looking not necessarily just to move up to the, let's say, SCADA and MES layer, where I think these IT tools are a lot more important, but how would they go about maybe learning how to program these types of applications, maybe even just learn about the protocols a little bit better, right? Because I think there's a lot of, let's say, PLC implementations of, let's say, MQTT, but an OT engineer is not going to, let's say, know how to build a cloud application that can ingest that and store it in a database. So maybe any advice or any, how to say it, maybe learnings from the journey you've taken that engineers on the OT side can maybe take and at least replicate or utilize.
Yeah, I can kind of talk about how I did it, and I think it worked pretty well. But most of it for me was kind of exposure therapy. Is I just needed to, I didn't know anything about software development, so I just started with a language I knew. So I knew Python from using Ignition, because Ignition has Python built in. I've been using Ignition since 2012. And so I started the very first thing was I tried to build something in Django. But actually, very first thing is pick a thing you want to build. Maybe not something super complicated, like maybe something simple, like a website, or the traditional example is a to-do list app, or better yet, for me, it was all about controls. So I wanted to build maybe a Modbus client, or something that could read in information from a device. And then if you pick that, and then you kind of start researching technologies and pick a technology you want to do, whether it's Python, JavaScript, Go, Rust, any of those languages, and you have in mind that you want to build this thing, then you can start Googling, how do I build, and then break it down into small chunks. Like I need to be able to parse a Modbus packet, So look up how to do that. And it becomes super easy now, right? Because you can ask ChatGPT how to do these things, and it'll give you a starting point. ChatGPT doesn't only give you the end goal, like the end game, but it gives you a starting point with it, at least to optimize some code. So I think it's a really exciting time for learning this stuff, because as much as AI does hallucinate on some things, it does a pretty good job at code, and helping you.
That's an interesting point. I've personally not tested it, so I guess I cannot speak to its accuracy, let's say, at that layer. But I certainly, I guess, wonder how easier it is, let's say, to build, let's say, a Modbus client at this stage versus when you were first building it. That is an interesting point, I would say.
It's honestly so I built a PLC, right, and I built I built some protocol drivers. I have Modbus and Tentacle, right, and I have OPC UA, which I am using the library for that, but what you might find is a lot of the things that are built by proprietors in industrial software are fairly simple and straightforward things to implement. You don't think so until you realize, like, you get involved. Like a PLC, all a PLC is a thing that runs a function on a periodic loop. That's all it does. Like, so writing that in JavaScript or Python or something like that it's a single file. It's not. If you look at the code for Tentacle, the PLC portion of it is not very complicated. It's kind of the same thing with like a PID controller. It's just one function that's running a loop. That's all it is. And you have some measurement points, like the time that has elapsed since the last time you ran the function. But it's So that kind of ties into the learning thing. Like try not to get intimidated, right? Like it might sound like a big problem at the beginning, and then you get into it and you start developing an understanding on it. Big problems start to get smaller, right? And the one thing that more recently has happened for me that's really great is so as a control systems engineer getting into software, I'll say it's a little bit lonely. Like I've really been doing software development on my own and relying on community resources to know what's right to do. And just recently, I got introduced to a friend of mine, Peter Stradinger, who's started his own little software development business, but he comes from a traditional software background, and we've gotten to pair program on some things, and it is so much better to have at least one person to bounce ideas off and work through things. So if you can find that person, or if you want to pair program with me, like if anyone out there has a project that they could use some insight on, message me. But it makes a big help to like be able to like have a community to like bounce ideas off of. There are things that I would never have thought of without talking to somebody else while I'm programming.
Be careful what you ask for, James. Hopefully you don't get inundated by messages. Look, I have so many questions and maybe directions where we could take this, but Dave, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Absolutely, James. I would especially be worried if Vlad decides he wants to start working on projects at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and then your messages are just completely over inundated. I would highly suggest sleep mode, so you don't wake up to messages in the middle of the night. Not from Vlad, but just folks in general. I want to go when we promised that we talk about software, and I do want to go talk about software. But before, you mentioned the soft PLC that you've built, Tentacle. I guess I have worked and played around with a number of soft PLCs. So soft PLCs, to kind of James's point, is a PLC that you could, in theory, go run on, in James's case, any Linux box. I've seen people attempt to go run them off of, old Dell or Gateway towers that they found in the basement. That typically never works well. But I've seen people go do that. What is the response been? Has it been, this is great to go ahead and test things out with? Has it been, this is what we want to go drive into production? I have in the past heard lots of people kind of scared of moving away from the hardware PLC that everyone generally knows and loves. But what has the feedback been on that?
So far, the couple places that we've used it, it's been pretty rock solid. Like I haven't I don't have to. Like I do have a PLC, a soft PLC that's running at a facility right now that I haven't touched in a year. It just publishes.
Interesting.
Now it's not doing a lot of complicated stuff. It's mostly just that's the nice thing is with Tentacle, it doesn't have to be a PLC. Like it can just be your edge gateway. So in that case, that's what it's doing. Is it's just taking in. It's just ingesting data from equipment and publishing. But I do have in one place where I have both a traditional soft PLC. I don't have a hard PLC on this. I do have one hard PLC actually, and I have Tentacle also running alongside because we're kind of transitioning. The soft PLC was there beginning, and we're transitioning to using Tentacle. Also, like full disclosure, Tentacle doesn't have every industrial protocol in it. Like we're working on that.
Yeah.
So I can use other, alternatives to get some other things in, and that's what we're doing. And in that case, Tentacle has not crashed once, but the other one has. So
Interesting.
like even just last night in the middle of the night, the other one crashed. So to your point about sleep mode, I'm used to working with manufacturers, so I get notified all the time anyway. But my experience is that it's more reliable. The thing that's cool about this is it's not like I developed everything from scratch. Tentacle is a Node.js runtime, right? So I didn't develop the runtime. And Node.js is for anyone who doesn't know, is a JavaScript runtime that runs on the server. It's bulletproof because it has to be, because it's used ubiquitously across the internet, which is another thing that I get, like a common argument is that against mainstream software development versus using stuff that's proprietary industrial is that the stuff that's for mainstream tech is not as reliable. But the reality is, like, these websites and the services that rely on these things, they are, while they're not responsible for human safety, they are responsible to remain running for millions and millions of dollars, right? So they're still bulletproof. I would say in a lot of cases more bulletproof than the traditional industrial software, depending on which one you're picking.
If I can add like a really quick point, I think, to what James is saying, and James, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's people can get burned, let's say, on deploying a Raspberry Pi with the software and sort of not creating any sort of redundancy and expecting that that's going to be the case, right? But you have tools like you've mentioned Kubernetes and you mentioned containers that you can almost on a cheaper level create redundant software and also failover software, right, in ways that you cannot do in, let's say, current PLC hardware, right? And of course, there are failover PLCs and redundant PLCs as well, but they will cost you, in my at least experience, exponentially more than, let's say, creating a server that can run, like 3 replicas of your PLC, and like it will be almost a seamless failover should that service fail, if it does fail, right?
Yeah. Now, though, what's one of the cool things that I've been working on, and I haven't had a chance to implement it anywhere yet, is, and this isn't even any of my software, is I run small industrial PCs like this one, and I have a Kubernetes cluster of them right here locally. So I get, and it's also like if you're familiar with the term hyperconverged infrastructure, it's basically having a cluster of servers and using both their compute and storage in a cluster across, so you don't have a SAN or any like NAS or anything. It uses the built-in storage of the actual machines. I'm running Ceph, which is clustered storage, open source clustered storage, free and open source, and I'm running Kubernetes, free and open source, with micro-K8s. And so I have a hyper-converged miniature IPC cluster that runs Tentacle, Mantle, and Postgres database and all that stuff right here, and the whole thing is less than $1,500. And it's and with hyper-converged infrastructure at a server class level, like the proprietary solutions are like around $100,000. This isn't like that much horsepower, but it's what's cool about Ceph, the storage cluster thing, is as you add nodes, you add compute, and so it gets faster as you add more nodes. So if you have a cluster of 20 nodes, you have a lot of horsepower. And it's very granular. Like obviously a workload can only run on one processor on one machine, but it's just a cool idea that I can do that at the edge with a small cluster and not be that much cost in hardware, or software licensing. So
interesting. I think that's interesting. I guess I would make one point of industrial versus non-industrial. I think most of the time when people think industrial just runs forever, it's less the software, and it's more the 50-year-old PLCs that are 30-year-old past end of life that just for whatever reason continue to work. When I think of that, I think of people talking about that as opposed to a normal 3 to 5 year cycle of IT of, hey, we need to go replace our servers because it has been kind of at that 3 to 5 year or whatever the normal for that company range looks like. And so I think that that is perhaps where we hear of, in theory, industrial grade of it will run forever versus the rest the rest of that. I do want to get to software because we are already somehow 20 minutes into this awesome conversation and we have not hit the software point that we thought we were going to take. But so James, you said that you saw a bunch of different kind of opportunities when it comes to like the SCADA and the MES from your previous experiences. Kind of based upon that, can you tell us a bit about the landscape, maybe some of the current challenges and opportunities that you're seeing in those software layers, please?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story, like how so I was building with traditional solutions right at the beginning, and then Ignition came along, inductive automation's product, right, and it blew my mind, right? Like they have 15-minute installs, which is like amazing, and it's web served, which is awesome, and and it is a great product compared to like the traditional SCADA systems. But then when you get into software development, like you kind of realize I think like Ignition is a great product for like a standalone, like on the plant floor SCADA, and even in the cloud in some situations. But I started getting involved with companies that were going to large scale, right? Mm-hmm. Like they have thousands of pieces of equipment they have to monitor, or across and geographically located around the world, or they have or they have, and in each independent thing needed its own SCADA, right? Yeah. So what happens is like the licensing model and the ability to scale without using something like Kubernetes is very limiting, right? Like having to pay, tens of thousands of dollars to license for each site because the lower tier isn't good enough. Like Ignition Edge wouldn't be good enough for some of these places, and then having that scale out to hundreds to thousands of units is like an astronomical, not only licensing cost, but just like a management cost, like just support is of that. You need to be able to support that many things. In mainstream software, they have solutions for this, right? So you have open source, so you don't have to worry about scaling licensing at that point, right? Like Kubernetes, I can scale out to as many nodes as I want. I can parallelize a web application as much as I have compute space for, right? I'm only limited by my hardware, not by software licenses. And then also I feel like I lost my thought, but so only limited by software license. Also to deploy out to all of these things, right? Like in mainstream software, if you're using mainstream software, like if you're using like a JavaScript application like runs in Tentacle or a web framework like the HMI for the Project Kraken stack, you can use continuous deployment to deploy the thing. So you can deploy once and have it deploy everywhere, or you can pick canary like sites, and you can say deploy out to these sites and test and see if it's good, then deploy out to the rest of the world. And that's all automated, right? It's just a push. And you can also do things like unit testing ahead of time. So automated testing, where when you push, it runs through the tests, and if they fail, it doesn't push it out to production. These are things that don't exist in traditional like control systems. I know that there's like some effort to get them into proprietary IDEs and stuff like that, but it feels like a long way off. Whereas in mainstream tech, it's already there. I can already do that. Like on my current clients that are utilizing Project Kraken, I can deploy en masse. And so those are the holes that I was seeing, right? Like I needed to be able to scale. I needed to reduce the licensing costs. Even as an integrator, I need to reduce the licensing costs, right? Like I don't want to pay for an IDE, and so these are the things that these are the reasons that I created Project Kraken, The other thing is like the other thing that's not really like an open source or licensing or anything is like just PubSub, which I know like Ignition has, but like I wanted PubSub by default. I don't want to have to create tags in multiple places. I want to create it at the edge and it shows up everywhere. And I want it to already be historized. I don't want to have to go say this one needs to be historized, this one needs to be alarmed. I want to do that all at the edge and have it just do its thing, which is what Project Kraken does today. You know.
Let me ask you, I guess, a question. When you have, I guess, like proposed that solution, because I'm assuming you didn't just build out a solution that could deploy to 1,000 sites and immediately got a yes, but first, let's say, proposed that idea. What was their like response? Were they maybe worried a little bit about custom building software, or were they like excited? Did you have to explain to them maybe these trade-offs and it was easily understood, or were they like pushing back like, hey, like let's just keep like whatever's already available on the OT side and keep using that?
It's a good question. There's a couple places where I've worked with this kind of thing, you know, and it's different, but it's like there's a unique things here, right? Like so the first place that I've seen this, they were already prone to leaning software development style. They preferred software over running traditional controls software. So I didn't have to fight. You know, it was just a conversation amongst people that were leading software development and already understood Git and continuous integration and continuous deployment. They already understood this terminology. They already wanted to do that and felt limited by the current situations. The other one, the one that currently is like the biggest user of Project Kraken, is they needed a partner. They don't know anything about software or controls, to be honest, and so they needed a partner to help them design a whole system. And they expanded from one unit, and I built it there, and it worked well, and we just kept going, right? So the proof was kind of in the pudding. We did it, and it worked well, and they are happy with it, and they're happy that I'm managing it or helping manage it. You know, so
yeah, it's a very interesting point, right? And I almost wonder if I guess the leaning towards more software or more like OT technologies heavily depends on the team that's currently, let's say, at the facility or maybe managing or directing multiple facilities. Because I've seen, I guess, like from my experience, companies that have maybe an IoT, let's say, requirement or presence where they want to collect data, which they can then do via software or via, again, like PLCs and that type of control hardware. If they have software teams already built out, they will be leaning more towards, hey, we're going to deploy an edge solution that's going to run, again, like either Docker or Kubernetes, and it's all going to be software based. And obviously the sensors are going to be industrial, but versus, a team that's been in production for many, many years, if not decades, that's been very heavily reliant on PLCs, they'll push sort of the other way, right? And they're going to argue towards, hey, like we should be using these like more like current off-the-shelf tools. And I think that's also a very important maybe conversation to have between the three of us, right? Where do you decide, hey, like let's build out something of our own, or let's use something sort of like off the shelf, or maybe like more open source, or like integrate that stack maybe. What are your thoughts when it comes to maybe those decisions from a manufacturer standpoint?
Yeah, I actually like I would sympathize with that like opinion of like I have a system, it's working, with proprietary equipment, the equipment that I'm used to, and I think that it's true. Like everyone has a different situation, and you need to do what makes sense for you. The one thing I'm trying to do with Kraken is like if you don't need to use Technical PLC as a PLC. Like you can collect from an Allen Bradley PLC or Siemens PLC or whoever you want, and you can use it to just as a data pipeline to enable you to use MQTT. So like, but I think that it's important that if there are forward-thinking solutions, that we still kind of remain compatible, right? So that people can leverage like the amount of money and stuff that they put into their existing infrastructure, But also this kind of ties it back into the point of what Dave brought up is like, like systems that like have lasted forever and like are still running, and like, and the trade-off between things that might not last for a long time, like having to replace computers every 5 years or whatever, like industrial grade versus non-industrial grade. I did want to say that it is nice that those things last forever. A lot of those things, because it's still a proprietary system, like for instance, like I've got a client who has a PLC 5 in place at a major water treatment plant, and that they need to replace it because they can't get hardware for it, and it's going to be a monumental project, like a big project. If you use the current systems, like if you use more modern technology and general purpose hardware and not proprietary systems, and also leverage some of the technology that I like to use, like another container package that's kind of it's similar to Docker because it's containers, but it's more like stateful. So it's containers as VMs. Like you create a container and you're expecting to keep it around. Docker, every time you restart a container, it throws everything away.
Right.
Incus, which is the other one I'm talking about, it creates it and it holds on to the state. So every time you reboot it, it's like rebooting a VM. Like everything's still there, you know. And it's what's cool about it is, you know, containers are way more lightweight than VMs. But what more importantly it can do is, if I put my entire environment, like my entire Tentacle PLC and Edge platform inside an Incus container, it has one command: move move this whole thing from this box to this box. You know, so that upgrade path, even if you have to do it every 5 years, you know, which you wouldn't have to with a lot of industrial PLCs that are made for industrial. But if you were to even do it every 5 years, that upgrade path on hardware becomes 5 minutes. You know, you pop the thing in, you run that command, it moves it over, everything's running again, and you're done. You know, none of this like go from PLC 5 to control logics, right? Or, you know, or something where you're going to spend hundreds of thousands, you know, or a million maybe. You know,
I'll make the comment, you know, and maybe a question also for both Dave and James, right? I'm not sure that, you know, when people reference PLC 5s as sort of the workhorse that's been around for 30 years, we're seeing that same trend with every PLC, right? I think the complexity has certainly risen in like these newer machines. I think that, you know, PLC 5s were, if I'm not mistaken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, they were running on microcontrollers, right? Which are inherently a lot more reliable than processors, well, because of less complexity ultimately. And even at that time, you could argue everything was, you know, through holes, so everything was a lot simpler, so to speak. So I guess the question or the comment is, I'm not sure that we'll see the exact same trend with the newer PLCs just as we did with the PLC 5, right? And I don't know what the data is at all. So
yeah, I don't want to be negative about it, but like, yeah, it feels that way to me. Like, right, like the current proprietary hardware is not as, you know, there's not much longevity there, you know, but yeah, that's hard to know without real data, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, on that side, I think we still see lots of slick 500s, right? Lots of slick 500s, lots of slick 505s. I feel like despite the fact that those have been obsolete for 10, 20 years, somewhere along that at this point, you still walk into a fair number of facilities and see those. And many times those are the newer PLCs.
Yeah.
To that point, I would think that we will not see as many slick 500s or PLC 5s or even compactor control logics or any of the other brands live for 20 plus years. But I think a lot of that is because we're in a major technological revolution or evolution, depending upon where you see it. And I think we'll see lots of changes in the coming years. And part of that will be we'll see lots of systems upgraded for a variety of reasons, including, to James's point, we can't get the parts, or the parts become super expensive, or it makes sense for a variety of reasons, be it cybersecurity or otherwise, to go ahead and upgrade. I want to make a point back to James's kind of original comments of scalability. And I think he brought up a really good point. I do want to say we've got, you know, a dozen or more folks floating in and out in the comments. Vlad and I have been making lots of comments. If you guys have thoughts and would like to attach your real names to those thoughts, please feel free to go ahead and go drop it on the LinkedIn. If you don't, we're also streaming on YouTube where you can have all of your fake usernames go ahead and make comments, and we can go ahead and read those comments in the chat as well. But having said that, I completely agree with James, but I see it more of an architecture issue as opposed to like specific pieces of software. And I think the solution really depends upon where you come in. When I come in, and every year I'll have, at least 2 or 3 conversations where a group is so committed down to the path that they already are, where they're hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into a solution, where they quite literally either can't or won't go through the process of re-architecting, right? And they've decided to put the software solution at the kind of edge of the machine or on server at the facility. And the only way for them to reasonably go ahead and scale in any way, shape, or form that would be comfortable is to literally go replicate that the dozen or 2 dozen times that they would have to at every single facility, right? And there might be better, different architectures that one could go in order to mitigate some of those software costs. But lots of times, be it kind of any of the vendors, the normal industrial solution is, hey, I'm going to go buy this license. I'm going to go put it on-prem at the facility. And if I need to go to another facility, I'm going to go do the exact same thing. For me, it's less the cost of the software license, which is generally minimal compared to the cost of the solution that we've designed on top of it and the scalability of the solution. And if we can't go through the process of easily
looks like
using it as other things. I was gone and now I'm back. Did I get to UDTs in my mini rant,
Yeah.
Vlad? Okay, perfect. But if we need to go through the process of having templates and UDTs and projects in order to be able to successfully go from one facility to the next at a faster rate so that we can go and hit it, and we can go, and if it takes, 10 weeks in order to develop the first facility, hopefully we can do the next one in 2 or 3 weeks, and hopefully we can do the rest in some number of days or still a couple of weeks, depending upon how similar they are from one facility to the next. But I find that it really depends upon the mindset. And if you can get to a group who is, and it really, for the most part, doesn't matter what software stack that they choose, who goes to the process of looking at it from a higher level of how can I save money over the course of this project, as opposed to how can I, in theory, do a pilot that maybe I can take the bones of and go scale out to the rest of them. I think that that's where some of the largest opportunities are, almost regardless of pieces of technology that we pick. And I find that there are not nearly enough groups who are going to go look at the problem and say, hey, we're going to propose a different solution if we're doing it once. If we're doing it once, we can do more hard coding. We can go, we don't have to worry as much about the templates, because I sadly know lots of groups who don't worry about those things regardless. And then it doesn't really matter because we've built it and it will run on this one facility, as opposed to if we're going to go do it across 6 facilities or 2 dozen facilities, we need to go spend the time to go understand what the architecture is going to look like and go look at a bunch of different sites and go build more of a global solution. And when I go look at those global solutions, I definitely look at potentially adding in, a software piece in order to go be able to go use and reuse those templates as we get kind of farther down the line. And I would say that has the potential, at least for the majority of clients that I talk to save them a lot more time and money over the life of the project, as opposed to just kind of picking and choosing of do we put it, where do we put the particular pieces of software?
Yeah, I mean, so like I see what you're saying in terms of like if we were going to utilize something traditional, like how you would go about it with templates and stuff like that. I will say, as someone who's done both, the amount of time and money that you save using something like continuous deployment with like GitHub Actions or something like that, it's just astronomical. Like different. Like you have to experience the ability to like just push out a change to 10 or 20 different places located all over the world, like just to just to kind of like, you have that raw power, right, with those solutions, and you can feel comfortable with it because you can automatically test that your code works before it gets out there, right? Like through automated test solutions. Like there's there is a, like what you described as a responsible way to do it if you're going to do it with something like Ignition or some other HMI platform. But like if you're going to use like this is the other like kind of big thing that I like realized too, is like everything that like Ignition's perspective module gives you, or like any other like web-based like development environment with traditional software, it's all available to you in a very similar way in web frameworks like SvelteKit and Vue.js and React. It's a little bit different. It takes some like an open mind, right? Because you don't have this GUI wrapper around the thing that you're building, right? Other than your IDE, but all of the, like, you have the ability to script, you have the ability to create components, you have the ability to create templates, you have the ability to structure your data and build out templates that you reuse in multiple places. Except for now, you also have like all these additional tools that you don't get in a traditional development environment for HMI, like linting, which is like where it automatically formats code for you. Unit testing, where you can actually literally test that your user components show up in the right place and that they have the right data and that they give you the right visualizations, or even like end-to-end testing, where you can run tests in the browser and then have the browser spit out like a report about whether it works, and then deployment, so what you mentioned is like, okay, we're going to go out to another plant and we're going to take that and make a new template, and then we have to reconfigure it, to work with this new plant. Like, you can eliminate a lot of that, even having to plan for the new facility phase, other than differences, right? Like by leveraging the current like web frameworks and stuff like that. Like I've done it both ways. It's astronomically faster, like it does take some like learning, right? But in my experience, like I've gone through that learning. It's not as big a problem as you. The other thing is, like, I don't want to be negative about the current technologies necessarily. Like, once upon a time, coding was hard, right? It's very, very difficult. There wasn't all the tooling that there is today. What seems to have happened is that the tooling for mainstream tech, and even the languages themselves, like JavaScript, Python, they've evolved so much. And it's like, we're in this current age where coding is not as hard as it used to be. And you don't need some of the abstractions that kind of were developed when coding was a difficult thing, and you don't really realize that until you try both things, right? Like, you don't realize that until you get involved in the software world,
Absolutely. I have many thoughts, but that would just continue to drive this even further down this path. I want to go ahead, and I feel like I've eaten a bunch, or James and I have eaten a bunch of this going back and forth. Vlad, I want to let you go ahead and jump in, because I know that you also have a perspective, if you want to share that, or if you want to go kind of continue to move us along, whatever your thoughts are.
I think, look, on my thought on that last comment, James, I think it's not only that coding has, I want to say, become easier, but I think it's also the principles that you've mentioned, right? CI/CD pipelines, like versioning, containerization. I think all of that is much more thought to software engineers versus, let's say, someone from the OT side. So I think when you start to build on that side, you also find, let's call it people or talent, whatever label you want to use, that understand those base principles, right? So when Dave mentioned, at the end of the day, I think you can build scalable and good software even with the OT tools, but I think those principles are not as well understood on the OT side. So the chances of you finding the groups that can do it the right way are, at least in my experience, smaller on the OT side than on IT, right? In software engineering, let's say like classes, or even if you're self-taught, that is almost like a given that your software should be in theory scalable, versus I think OT traditionally, the way it's passed down in organizations, you are typically building more siloed applications, right? For a number of reasons, right? And that's a whole other, I think, like long discussion as to why. But like I said, I think it's the not just the code, but those like less like intrinsic best practices are better understood on the software side, which make it scalable. But I guess I want to transition into the whole, and we've talked a little bit about this on the open source side. I think that is also sometimes, at least in my conversations, even with end users, I think that it's not that they don't understand fully what open source means, but I think it's almost like they want to have the benefit of open source, but they don't necessarily always utilize it, right? And what I mean by that is, like, of course I would want code that is free. Of course I would want to like modify in theory a system, but a lot of them simply don't, right? The reality is that I think you want it, but you don't necessarily leverage to its full potential. And then on the flip side, I think that companies in certain instances that do leverage open source don't always understand that you need to contribute back to open source in order to help the project thrive for everyone. So I guess I wanted to go back to the whole like open source debate and maybe get your thoughts on maybe take the opposite side, so to speak, and like what could be conversations that make it less sellable to some of the end users, and maybe what are your thoughts on maybe the negatives of open source type of projects?
Yeah, I'll say with open source, at least one thing that I feel like most people might not realize but should is like they're like open source is like very granular. Like you're using open source, like almost all of the like a lot of the tools that we use. I don't know about like a lot of the proprietaries because obviously you can't see the source, so you don't know. But like a lot of people use open source underneath their proprietary like software. Like Ignition uses like open source underneath it. Everyone's already using open source. Languages are open source. JavaScript is open source. Python's open source. So even the code you're writing with is. So you're already using open source, even if you have a policy to say that you're not. But I will say that. So like to your point about like open source being like maybe less reliable or like I don't know if you said that, but you said like why you wouldn't want to use it. Like I think some people might think like, oh, open source, if I'm paying for a product, then I'm paying for it to be reliable, and if I'm not paying for a product, even it's not necessarily as reliable. And I will say that there are unreliable open source solutions out there. There's also unreliable paid solutions out there. So you have to like discern. You have to have the same level of discernment when you're evaluating an open source product versus a vendor. But in the open source, you have the benefit of you can read the source. So if you know how to code, or you know somebody who knows how to code, you can have them evaluate the source, or you can evaluate the source yourself and decide whether it's something that you would want to, what do you want to use? And you can also decide, okay, say what I'm worried about is that whole open source team just falling apart and that project is not something that's viable anymore. Is this something that I could fork and I be the maintainer eventually, or a friend of mine, like programming friend of mine, So you have options with open source that you don't have as a vendor. If a vendor folds, you're done, So I would keep those things in mind. And I don't have that opinion that you would never pay for software, like for proprietary software necessarily, but I do feel like for a vast majority of things that I'm using, especially like base level things that are ubiquitously used across the industry, like those things should be open source, not even just like from a they should be free standpoint, but like we should get community buy-in and have everybody should have the ability to decide how a PLC works, and build a nice standard around that, right? Like, because our standards right now are not good, right? Take the IEC 16131-3 languages, like those are standards, but they are different for every single manufacturer. You cannot take one manufacturer's code and use it in another one. So what's the point of the standard? Like, and whereas with JavaScript or Python, you can run it wherever you want because it is open and a standard. And even like the standards that we use, like TCP/IP and like the really basic level standards, those are standards that work with multiple different networking manufacturers and stuff like that. That's a standard, So that's what I would say is like just keep an open mind,
Let me ask you, I guess, like a question on the first point, which is, I think, I guess, like what happens at least a bit more in open source, or maybe it's just more talked about in open source, is that maybe a few bad apples would create the impression that you've described, where people don't see it as reliable. And I think in some instances, in very extreme cases, right? I think this happens very rarely, where they would switch the license, and we saw that with HashiCorp. Dave and I talked about this, like last fall, where they've revoked the open source license, and I believe there's a CNCF project now that forked it, at that time, and now they are maintainers. So I'm wondering if there's that fear of, we simply will not have the resources to maintain it should it like fail or would require a fork. And I think it's also, maybe the mentality that at least like I have to some extent is, I feel like I need to pay for something to be supported over a period of time, right? And I think like Dave and I had actually conversations about this like off stream, where even like productivity apps, you don't want to just like buy it at once. You want to be able to pay developers to release the features on an ongoing basis. And I think it's not that you don't necessarily do it for open source, but I think it's like less incentivized. So there's less of that structure where, even if I'm, let's say, willing to pay, there's less people kind of pulling in that money to make sure it is incentivizing that developer to keep, maintaining the project. Because at the end of the day, these resources are still not free, right? If we talk about Kubernetes, it is supported by a massive company, and it's probably not going to die. But a smaller project, if it doesn't get enough like resources and backing, then it becomes a bit more difficult to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think I don't know, I didn't address this, but I think this is kind of the same thing you were asking before is like, how do you monetize in with open source in industrial? Like what are the ideas around that? And it is interesting because it is different. Like in mainstream tech, you do have benefactors, right? Whereas in industrial, you might not have enough people that like, that's just not their model, right? That's not how we do it. But I can tell you that like, and I don't have the answer, right? In terms of like how because I'm still at the beginning of this thing and trying to figure out how I want to do it with my projects, But I will say, like, if you're developing like a PLC platform or like what I've done with Project Kraken is like a base level. For me, like I'm a system integrator. I've always been one, like or a consultant, and I'm completely fine monetizing that way. So what's cool about developing like base level architecture like that is there's always going to be application specific things that I have to build, and I can get paid to build those things, So for now, that's kind of the plan is I'm able to monetize that. Like I'll take my software that I've developed or this open source project, say it wasn't even mine, and build your software for you, and you pay me to build your software, and at least you save the licensing costs. You would still have had to pay someone to develop it anyway, even if you paid for a licensing, from a different project. So, like that's kind of the plan right now. I do feel like I would love it if it was the other way. Like if you had also funding from benefactors who realized what you're saying is that we need open source projects, or open source projects are great. They need funding, so we're going to provide that funding because we have money and we want to use that software. So basically, looking at it as we build them up, they save us money, kind of thing. I do think that's cool.
And I would say, like, look, again, just the last maybe like comment before I pass the mic to Dave on that side. I think it's very, I guess, like at least I'm not going to name like the specifics, but I think there's a couple of examples where very large companies, and you mentioned there's obviously open source like underneath a lot of the software, regardless, but they would take a project that is open source and obviously use it for their paid offering, but then not even just not contribute, monetarily, but they would also not even contribute resources, right? And to be honest with you, like, right, and exactly. And so I don't know how we solve that. I don't know if it's another regulatory body, of which we already have many, would almost like mandate, like if you're going to use open source, then like, hey, you should probably contribute at some point. That, like I said, I don't know what that looks like, but I think it certainly is a bit unfortunate.
The way there is this. I'm not saying this is the solution, but this is what I see some people doing is using copyleft licenses, right? Where this is open source, you can use it, but if you use it, yours is open source too. You know, like you can't close your source, which doesn't prevent them from charging for their downstream project, but it does keep them from closing the source of their downstream project, which makes it maybe a little bit difficult to monetize. So I'm not necessarily saying that's a solution, but it is a thing you can do. And I think it works for a lot of things. Like it works for not a lot of things, but it works for some projects because where it's like, you know, that you never want any downstream projects that this thing to be able to be closed source. Like you feel like if anyone did that, it'd be unfair. So I think it does make sense in some cases, but there are certain things where like an MIT license just makes sense. Like web frameworks are usually Apache or MIT, so you can use it for anything. You can monetize off of downstream project, and I think that's right because it's such a base level thing that you want people to be able to build products on top of it. You know, so yeah, I don't know if I didn't answer the question. I don't have an answer like a good answer for that. That's a great point. You know, but.
I don't know if there is an answer, right? And as Vlad said, he and I have discussed this. I probably every 6 months make a post where I go talk about how I like going and paying for software that I enjoy, apps. And there are a couple of apps who I am generally happy to go pay for every 6 months or a year whenever the yearly subscription hits, because they're super important to my workflow. And if I'm happy to pay the $60 or $100 a year in order to go fund the developers so that myself and the however many thousands of other people who generally happily pay for it can afford the developers to continue developing and pushing out updates and making sure that it continues to work. I think that's important. I haven't particularly seen that move or transition well into this field, which is kind of how I think we get into this gray space about open source versus not open source. Josh is here. Josh has a question. I haven't read 100% of the question, but we're just going to go for it. Josh asks, how many people would say their closed or proprietary software vendors seemed motivated or incentivized to improve their products? I feel like I'm constantly hearing customers talk about XYZ feature that they asked for 5 years ago, still not being implemented. James, I don't know if you have thoughts and want to go take that, or you can just shake your head no, and I will go ahead and jump on the potential grenade that I just asked.
I would say I am sympathetic with that experience. You know, like it's like, so like I said, like I come from system integration, like that's what I do, you know, and a lot of the reasons I'm building my own tooling is because I want it to work a certain way. And I don't feel like I get the level of support that I need from vendors to build those things in. I'm not going to get, like, I know that some vendors are working on version control. I know some vendors are working on like even like AI integration and stuff like that. But if I don't, like, I'm able to use that tooling now because I'm doing what I'm doing, you know? Yep. So like, and so I totally, I don't know how many people feel this way, but I feel that the same way that Josh asked this question about. Like it's the reason that I am that way. The other thing that I don't, you know, and this doesn't really play to implementing features, but vendor support in industrial has always felt subpar to me. Like I don't know of a good vendor that does support very well. You know, most of the time I'm working around their situation. I have to rely on my ingenuity and not the support of vendors, you know? So support and feature development, like, yeah, totally. I feel the same way. You know?
I think maybe,
oh, go ahead there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think to a large point, and to Josh's point, people vote with their wallets and their money. And if you say, hey, I'd really like this, but you don't do anything to incentivize the vendor, either offering to pay to have it built or going away from whatever network switch that Josh is talking about, I think that, right, like we either choose to spend money to go solve the problem or we choose to go spend our money another way. And I don't think that we necessarily will find a better way in the short term, other than going and looking at other offerings. And I would say, to kind of James's point about vendor support, I feel like it's gotten worse in the last 8 or 10 years. I think lots of things have gotten worse in the last 8 or 10 years. And as we lose the experienced engineers at a lot of these places, like there are just not the people who have the answers to these questions and these problems we run into, and or you can't get to the one person in the organization who actually knows the answer to these problems.
Yeah.
I was gonna add, I guess, so I've seen it again. I've personally experienced that on the hardware side, right? And so, to Dave's point, I think the bigger your wallet and the bigger your purchasing or walk away, let's call it power, the more of an influence you make, right? And it's an
Mhm.
unfortunate, I'd say, reality, but that's just how the business side of these things work, right? And so, what happened was, again, without naming the vendors or the end user, is one of the, let's say, servo platforms was being made obsolete a lot sooner than anticipated by that end user, and they simply told the vendor, like, hey, we're not going to purchase any more of your hardware unless you provide support for this many years, which was almost double what the vendor was trying to obsolete them by. And so the vendor, quite simply because of the amount of I guess, order they were getting from this end user, had to, go back on their decision and simply, do, or I guess, like, follow what the end user was asking. And I'm assuming it's the same on the software side, right? If you're a massive buyer of whatever software, then the more you're spending, as Dave mentioned again, the more decision power you have. And so I think it almost, it seems, if you're like a smaller, let's call it, fish, you don't have as much decision power, but it's almost like that's the reality of the business world. And again, maybe unfortunate depending which side you're on, but that's simply how things work in my experience and opinion.
That is amazing. We've got a bunch of people in here, and for all the people who wanted to know, we have somehow managed to hit 2 of the 4 or 5 topics that we wanted to get to. I would like to make sure that we get to at least one more, so I want to go start this question as part of like the rapid fire questions we're going to go ask James. But we want to talk about building out a systems integration business, software development versus off the shelf solutions. James, can we get your thoughts on? I mean, you are to the process in 5 or 6 years into going and building out your systems integration business, and we know the direction you've gone from the last hour that we've talked. But if someone were looking to go kind of start out today, what are your kind of high level thoughts? What would be your suggestions?
James, I think your mic is not working, at least on my
Oh,
side.
yeah, I also
Something.
don't hear James. James, can you hear us? I
We can
can't hear
see your
you.
mouth moving, but
Yes.
there's no sound, it seems like.
Nope, can't hear you
How
yet.
about now? Is now
There you
Okay,
go.
we can hear you now.
okay? That was weird.
We ran out of minutes, guys.
Yeah. I was gonna say. Oh yeah. So I would say if you're gonna start a consulting business at all, it is super helpful if you already have, like, so for me, when I started my consulting business, I had clients from working in consulting previously that I could go to. So that is definitely like a big boon. But if you're specifically looking to start in software, so like learning how to develop is obviously important, and so some of the points that I made at the beginning about learning how to do software development, I think tie in. But I think one of the big things is just share, like just share as you learn, and share and build out example projects and things that you can show off. So yeah, just it's basically like build and code and show things. If you don't know how to get in with people so that you can like cold call or email them, then just put your stuff online and let people see what you're about, and then like honestly, like most of my like inroads into places have been all of that. Like I create a thing, I think it's cool, I put it online, and a client comes. So I would say that's worked pretty well for me.
Interesting. I love that. I love that. I feel like if people follow exactly that, there's probably lots of disappointment in order to go get in front of the people to be able
Yeah.
to see that. But I like that, and I would agree. Going and building things. If you have projects that you
Yeah.
can share. That
Yeah.
is a great way to show people seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. And if you have solutions that you have built, either for clients that you can anonymize or otherwise, people always love to see it. And if they can see themselves buying that solution, I think that that is a great, I think that that's a great answer. We at some point will have James back on to continue that question and literally 2/3 of the questions we were going to ask him, because as people listen, people listening, longtime listeners or no, sometimes we'll just go down those rabbit holes, and hang on because we're going down those rabbit holes. James, this has been amazing. We do want to ask you all the questions that we get to go ask, that we ask all of our guests. And the first one, I think, is one of the most fun ones and potentially my favorite. But we want to ask you to go ahead and predict the future, be it in software or software, and within the automation space. What are your thoughts? Where do you see that moving in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I have my hopes, but also more recently, it just seems to be moving this way. I really do think that at least like mainstream software projects like that totally make sense, like Kubernetes, will make their way, and they already are making their way into the industrial space, into manufacturing and otherwise. So that's my prediction, is that it'll continue to infiltrate, especially also too, as you see like it's still true that like more people come out of college with computer science backgrounds and like mainstream software development backgrounds. And so even if they do get introduced into industrial, they're going to bring those ideas with them. So I think you'll just see the like continuing to expand, like the things that I've been talking about. I think that those will just continue to expand. Hopefully that's like a good enough answer.
No, absolutely. I love that. Go ahead,
If
Vlad.
I can add like a point, James, I really hope that there's more resources, I guess, and materials that like train people on these, like, I want to say traditionally IT tools within the context of, OT or manufacturing, right? I think even like, I guess I know Kubernetes, I want to say decently. I think there's no training that sort of I guess explains to engineers like the benefits in the OT side and how you could, like get started with Kubernetes using some of the OT applications, right? And my hope is, again, I'm just using that as an example, but even CI/CD pipelines within the context of OT, like what is possible. And I know vendors are releasing more and more tools to make that happen, but I still don't think there's enough maybe knowledge sharing happening on the OT side. So my hope is, paired with the tech, there's also some like better or more resources and knowledge.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd really like to do is like, I mean, you might have noticed or whatever. I try to put out stuff like just videos like whenever I can. I'm a consulting engineer, so a lot of times I get completely engrossed in work. But in my spare time, I like to post things as much as I can to share. So like I would to your point, I want to be part of that, like the sharing of how these things can improve your life as industrial, peoples, so yeah, I definitely hope that's true, that you get better documentation and more exposure from social media posts and content,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you saw that comment from Josh. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, Josh says Vlad is asking for Joy-Con, and Vlad is here for it. So it'll be a party of 3. Everyone can go to, I don't know, we'll open up Vlad's parents' house. I've never met Vlad's mom, but I'm sure she'd just love if everyone showed up there for Joy-Con. But no, I would agree with those comments. I see lots of large enterprise groups going towards more of those IT tools from CI/CD to kind of beyond. And I think those are going and driving more of that adoption. And I see a lot of younger startups who maybe either don't have the OT experience or have lots of IT experience going and using and deploying those tools as well. So I hope to see more of those tools deployed to the field. And maybe that is the precipice that we need for the rest of it. James, we do want to ask for some career advice. So especially if people are kind of like young to mid-career, looking to get further into what you're talking about, what are the best pieces of career advice you have for them?
Be ready to always learn. Like, just to be constantly learning. And if you love that, which I do, it's a great life if you just like want to continuously always know that you don't know everything, you know? So yeah, be hungry and also think outside the box. So like one thing that I think has served me well, that isn't something that I think about doing, but I do, is I always think everyone else is doing something better than what I'm doing. So I always want to try to find the best way to get something done. And I always think that the way that I'm currently doing it is not the best way. And I want to get, more. And I guess it's a little bit of that's like poor from an anxiety standpoint, but from a learning things standpoint, it's great, on the anxiety standpoint thing, take care of yourself. So just because of that, I tend to overwork. I work a lot, but I have learned now that I'm, getting to be 40. I'm turning 40 this year. That I need to take care of myself. Like in the last year, I've kind of got my health together and like doing the things that I need to do, sleeping better, exercising, spending time with the family, as much as we enjoy technical things and stuff, and as much as coding is fun, you need to stop for a bit and take a break and take care of yourself. So that's my other career advice. The other thing is to be bold. I suffer from this, or I suffered from this. I feel like maybe I'm getting, and I still am, but like imposter syndrome is rampant, especially in software. You're not an imposter. Everybody's trying to figure it out. So, if you feel like something's a good idea, go after it. That's what I'll say.
Absolutely. I love that. I think all of those are good. If not like some way, shape, or form, diametrically opposed, but I think all three of those are good in balance and moderation. So thank you for those, James. I think we especially, I think for all of those, sometimes we all need to be reminded of them. Next up, some book and or content recommendations. I know you've got a couple for them. And we're always looking for books or new podcasts to listen to. So what do you have for us today?
I got this was actually Josh, who's been asking a few comments. He sent me this book in the mail. It's called The Creative Act: A Way of Being by Rick Rubin, who's a music producer. He talks about how everything you do, even from like deciding what clothes you want to wear in the morning, is a creative act. Like you're always being creative. To be human is to be creative. And I just love that way of looking at life. I love being creative. Like that's kind of why I like to make new things, and I think a lot of people struggle with feeling like they are creative and want to be, so it's a great book. Like it's great to remind yourself that you're in control and you're able to kind of make the situation around you what you want to make it, because human beings are creating as they go in life, but it's a good one. And then for business, I've been like really interested in software as a service as a way of monetization. So I picked up the SaaS playbook from Rob Walling, who is he's the co-founder of Drip, the digital marketing company, and that exited. He was since sold that company, but he just has some really great straightforward advice for if you're going to try to start a software business, especially one that's a SaaS online. It's really good. And then if you're trying to learn technology, I listen to two podcasts, Syntax FM and by Wes Poss and Scott Talinsky, and DevTools FM, where they have regular guests online from people who developed big projects. Like they had the founder of Docker online, and they have a lot of cool ones. So those are great ways to like just keep up with mainstream tech. I learn a lot. I find a lot of libraries and cool things that I can use in my work from those two podcasts. So
that is awesome. Thank you so much for that, James. Last question we have for you is, who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? How can our audience and the listeners help you?
If you want to learn and you want to develop and contribute to open source projects and you have the time, like Project Kraken is open source. It's JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript or not, it's either way. I need people to help to help even just put together documentation, you know? So if you just reach out, you can message me, or you can hit me up, message me on LinkedIn. And we're looking for contributors for sure. Or the other way is if you want to, if you have a project, if you happen to be an end user with a project that thinks they could use the technology, and you're looking to work with it as it's getting developed, we're always looking for places to implement. So reach out to me for that too. I don't really have any, like, if you want to contribute monetarily, I do have a GitHub sponsors too, which, you know, I've taken the occasional like $5 contribution from there, or $10 contribution from there. So that always helps, but not necessary. I actually would just more love to be in contact with people that are interested, you know? So.
Absolutely, James. This has been amazing. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. I think this is the first time in recent memory, James, where we actually have more people here at the end listening to that than we did like 30 minutes in. Everyone piled in the afternoon. Maybe everyone was having happy hour as we were having this discussion. But James, Thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for spending another Wednesday afternoon hanging out with Vlad and I and James. If you guys are not connected with James or Vlad or myself or following the show, please go ahead and do that. Most of you, or I guess only 2/3 of you now, are watching on LinkedIn. If you are, we probably know you. If we don't, please feel free to go ahead and reach out. If we don't know you guys and you're watching on the Solos PLC Facebook or the Manufacturing Hub YouTube or Twitch or Twitter or any of those things, please feel free to go ahead and drop a comment, say hi. We always love connecting with you. I imagine we know most of you in real life or in fake real life, that is the internet. But please feel free to go ahead and drop a hello. If you guys have made it this far, please give us a thumbs up and like it. Please go ahead and share. If you guys have made it this far in podcast format, you are once again champions. Please give us a 5-star rating and like and share and all of those other things. When I remember to ask and we remember to upload the podcast regularly, James, more people listen, which is just this amazing upward line. And so that's why we continue to do it. Until next week when we talk about IIoT. We'll talk to